So there's a debate that goes on in the HVAC community that's been going on for a long time. In fact, the HVAC community is pretty famous for coming back to the same debates over and over again, no matter how relevant they are. And one of the debates is, should we be using analog or digital gauges? Everybody out there is like, oh my gosh, not this again. And I'm only going to talk about it to say this. I think the time of advocating for analog gauges is over. And the reason why I think it's over is because now we have so many refrigerants, so many blends, so many options that could appear in our daily schedule as far as refrigerants that it's virtually impossible to carry enough analog gauges that have the PT on the gauge for all of these refrigerants. And I think what's going to happen if we continue to use analog gauges for whatever reason, perhaps you trust analog, you don't trust digital, perhaps you can only afford analog. It's just, there's a whole bunch of different reasons you can justify using analog. But what's going to happen is you're going to get out to the job site, you're going to be doing a service call, and you're going to be working on a unit, and you're going to see a sticker on it that says 422D or 421A or 427A or MO99. And you're going to say, all right, well, I'll just use the PT for R22 because I have a gauge here that has 134, 22, and 410A on it. Or maybe you have a gauge that says R12, 22, and 502. Hey, you might be extremely analog out there. You might be going back to super analog. But what's going to happen when you do that, you're going to use the R22 PT chart, and it's going to be off. Somewhat. Depending on what refrigerant you're choosing, it's going to be off. Because almost all of these R22 replacements have a lower suction pressure in relation to the saturation temperature. Meaning, if you have R22, it's at around 58 psi, that correlates to about freezing. So you're right around 32 degrees. Now, if you're 58 psi at 407C, 422B, and several other replacement refrigerants, you're going to be above freezing. So the diagnosis process could be altered based on those different PT charts. Plus, you don't use the same style as for R22 because R22 is single component. You're going to be using bubble and dew point for the other refrigerants because they're all blends. They're all blends that boil off differently in an evaporator, and you have a temperature glide. Basically, if you have a blend with 3 or 4 different refrigerants in it, they're all going to boil off at different pressures because different pressures on different refrigerants correspond to different temperatures. So they're all going to be a little bit different, and then you're going to have a glide, a degree of temperature difference between one and the other, the greatest and the least, and that's your biggest glide. So you can't use the R22 PT chart. Now, that only matters if you actually care. It only matters if that means something to you. So if you go in there and you don't do superheat and subcooling, which at this point is the most basic form of troubleshooting there is no more I just look at pressures because it's irrelevant to just look at pressures. If you listen to many people out there, they will tell you, and I've heard this time after time, and I do think there is significance in pressures. Obviously, pressure will tell you something, but they always say look at the temperatures. And that's the important thing, especially when you're looking at an evaporator or a condenser and you don't even know what refrigerant it is. It's important that as you become more experienced of a technician, that you acquire some of this thinking because it's going to take you to a more perfected place. If you go from saying, well, we have 70 psi to we have 45 degree evaporator, we have a 40 degree evaporator, we have a 32 degree evaporator, what's going on? Is it airflow? Is it refrigerant? What's the problem out there? And there's a big difference. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit in the next section. But I think, and I want you guys to weigh in on this, if you're on YouTube, you can leave a comment, you can leave a live chat, whatever it is that you're available to do at that moment. If you're listening to this as a podcast, there is a comment page at our podcast page, but I don't think anyone ever uses that, and I don't ever check it. So it doesn't matter if you use it or not. I'll never see it. You can email me, hvacshoptalk@gmail.com. Is there any possible reason, besides that quick check, the Z-manifold check, to carry analog gauges? Now, I'd still carry stubbies. You can carry digital stubbies too. That would be okay. The digital stubbies are more useful, like the Robin-Ear gauges. I call them the Z-Connect, I believe, if I remember correctly. If you use a digital gauge that has a PT for several refrigerants in it, which those did have a PT for like 20 or 30 refrigerants, then you're much better off than using analog stubbies that have 3 refrigerants on them, or 2 refrigerants on them, or however many they fit on there. And it's harder to read the analog stubbies for saturation temperatures than it is for the digital, just to give you the temperatures. It is important to understand the process, but at this point, I think we're past a point where analog teaching is relevant. If you want to watch more videos just like this one, click on this playlist right here. If you want to see our brand new video, click right here. If you want to find out more about the great sponsors that make this show happen, click up here. And to join our email list where I notify you when we're going live, click right here.